And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Manny Cruz, City Council at Large from Salem, Massachusetts. Manny, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Errol, good to be with you. And I'm actually a school committee member at large in Salem, the vice chair.
Okay. I'm sorry. My apologies for that. Thanks for correcting me. So, Manny, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so good to be with you. My name is Manny Cruz, and I'm proud to serve as the first Afro-Latino vice chair of the Salem School Committee. Salem is my home. I grew up here. And by way of background, my family immigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic. I live in Salem with my wife, Vanessa, and my 9-month-old daughter, Ivy Sophia. I primarily have engaged in work in both the nonprofit sector and in government. I previously served under two state representatives, State Representative Paul Tucker and State Representative Juana Matias. And now I am currently the advocacy director at Latinos for Education. And so Salem is my home, and I have the pleasure of serving our children and families on the school committee, where I'm a proud graduate of our public schools. And I'm always looking for ways to continue to give back to our community. So that's a little bit about me, Errol.
Well, that sounds pretty good. Congratulations on your 9-month baby daughter. That's always good to have those young ones coming and growing up. You know, that's a beautiful thing. So tell me, going to the position for state rep, how best would it impact you serving your community? How would it enrich your community with you in that position, opposed to be just where you at this juncture?
Thanks for the question, Errol. And I'm running for state representative here in Salem because I firmly believe that I have the unique blend of experience as a municipal legislator, someone who's worked in the legislature on key issues, and then additionally as an advocate, I've worked on statewide legislation. So I firmly believe that each state representative has the opportunity to put forward policies that really touch the lives of people in the Commonwealth. And when it comes to Salem, we are a community that's a gateway city, and we have the same challenges that we're seeing all over the Commonwealth, whether we're talking about the impacts of the global pandemic, the housing crisis, the need for economic mobility and prosperity. All these are things that the legislature is taking up. We have legislation that is going to fundamentally address issues such as climate change, housing production, and addressing some of the equity gaps in our educational system. And so we need a state representative who has the experience of building coalitions, delivering results, and staying connected to the district. And that's something that I've always prided myself on as a policymaker, is being able to work on the ground with the same coalition of advocates who come to me on school committee to address the issues that are impacting their children. And I think that I can take my same style of collaborative leadership to Beacon Hill and deliver for the people of Salem.
That sounds pretty good. I want to ask you one other question here. Now, back in the early 2000s, when Bill Clinton would have signed NAFTA into act, that's the North American Free Trade Act, the states, the nation as a whole had benefit economically speaking. But in result of that, hundreds of thousands of jobs was exported out of this country. There was a significant reduction in the workforce. It drove the nation into inflation at one point. And unfortunately, at that time, George Bush had came into power and inherited that inflation and the reduction of jobs. Everything fell on his ticket. So one of the things why I ask that question is simply because Salem is doing well in commerce, but I want to look at from a micro level. How is the people faring? Commerce as well, but domestically, how are they impacted with careers and prosperity, etc.?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking this question, and certainly want to be cognizant that some of the international agreements that we put forward here in the country certainly reach and impact us at the local level. There's no question about that. Salem is a gateway city, which is a designation that speaks to the economic standing of our residents. And we have some disparities. If we look at people of color, if we look at our younger generations, we'll see that there's some significant income gaps between us and other communities that are just neighboring when it comes to our median income and the amount of money that people are making living in Salem. And so I guess what I would say to that end, Errol, is that we really need to be forward thinking about our economy. Salem is really a tourism based industry that we've set up. We are an attraction, probably one of the most visited places north of Boston, but we're also a really interesting place for new businesses to come in. And we've seen some growth that has been beneficial to our public schools, our infrastructure, and growing the city coffers. But I think that what we really want is to have economic prosperity for all residents. And so how do we get there? I firmly believe that Salem could be a leader in clean energy. We have a new project that is coming, offshore wind, that is going to be replacing an old energy plant. And there's a real opportunity for us to tap into our university, which is trying to complete the sale of a portion of its campus so that we can open up a new science wing so that we can start moving our students and our residents into STEM careers. So I firmly believe that, we can be a leader in clean energy here in Salem, and that we need a state representative who's going to be able to go to the legislature and not only support legislation that gets us there a little bit quicker, but additionally being able to advocate in the budget for new job training programs that are ensuring that we are thinking about climate justice impacted communities, and that those are the first folks that are receiving job training for those jobs of tomorrow. So I do think that Salem has a great opportunity to tap into the clean energy sector. Additionally, we're home to a hospital system and healthcare system here in Salem. And so there are some real exciting opportunities the pandemic has presented with respect to new pipelines for folks to enter into the field of healthcare. And we definitely see a need with respect to some of the other industries that we hope we can attract in Salem. But I think that those are two of the places that I would start to look at for sure.
Great. There's also the fact that bullying is also playing a major role now in some of the schools in Salem. Do you come across any complaints for this or anything like that? Bullying? Yeah, so as a school committee member, I can tell you that we do a lot of work in our district regarding social and emotional learning. This is the most important work that we can do with our students, is to ensure that they have a safe learning environment. And I'm pleased to share that we've really done the work in Salem over the last 20 years to really build welcoming environments for all of our students, whether they're immigrants, they're students of color, they're members of the LGBTQ community. We've had programs in place in Salem for a long time that I think were really making a difference for our students. But I would say that we don't really have a really prominent issue like this in our public schools. We just have so many systems in place to support our students. And when they do happen, we've got conflict resolution in place. We have counselors. And we also have some community-based programs that really help mediate issues between our young people. I think the focus is really about making sure that our students have the resources that they need to flourish in the classroom. So that means ensuring that we are fully staffed, that we have access to mental health supports for our students, and then additionally, that we're able to offer exciting extracurricular activities that keep our students engaged. So that's a little bit about the context in Salem. I think we're a leader when it comes to social and emotional learning in the Commonwealth, and our students, they're thriving because of it. Beautiful. I know as a young man that state rep wouldn't be the only office you will aspire to go after in the future. Maybe sometime you may be looking at running for governor. I don't know. Is that anything that crossed your mind?
Appreciating this question, Errol. And I love my community in Salem. I have vision for what I could do as the state representative. I think it's about having goals whenever you enter into positions. So when I joined the school committee, that was my focus, was serving on the school committee, growing my leadership, serving our students and our parents, working with our administration to close equity gaps. And I've become the vice chair of the school committee, and the first Afro-Latino to do so. And if I'm elected as state representative, I'm planning on finishing my term, which is a 4-year term, because I want to make sure that our Latino community has representation on the school committee, as I am the sole Latino school committee member here in Salem. Additionally, when it comes to the state representative role, that's a legislature that I know very well. The House of Representatives, it's changing here in the Commonwealth. And I personally, if I was elected, have the goal of becoming a chair of a committee and being able to push forward legislation that addresses some of our equity gaps. Given my experience in education, again, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but my goals would be, 6-8 years down the line, that I'd be in consideration for the chair of the Joint Committee on Education, so that I could continue to do the work of pushing forward policies such as expanding pre-K opportunities here in the Commonwealth, addressing educator diversity, and growing programs in the Commonwealth that we know are making a difference in the lives of the students that need us most, like the early college program, which is designed to really address the college attainment gap for our first generation BIPOC students here in the Commonwealth. So that's the vision I have for the position, would be to grow into a committee chair level position. And the building is certainly becoming more diversified. And I think it would be fantastic to become the first Latino chair of the Education Committee.
Nice. Well, I want to take you across a different threshold of some different matters. The nation basically is somewhat divided. And you can see clearly that there is the re-establishing of the old Jim Crow years and concepts and precepts about lives, which in actual fact affects minorities as a whole. We see that most Republican states had find ways of destroying voting rights, is to suppress the votes at any cost. What kind of a nation that stands for democracy, considering January 6th insurrection, what kind of a nation that stands for democracy and is the pace setter for the world, how do the world view us at this point?
Yeah, so another great question. I would certainly say that there has been some attacks on democratic institutions over the last, I would say, 20 years, right? We've seen this diminishing respect for our country's founding values of freedom, of representation, of being able to access the voting booth. And I think it really did start, we saw a shift in the way that our politics operated right around the time that President Obama was elected. I think that we really started to hear from the other side a lot of shifts with respect to what they thought was important. And so gerrymandering across the country. So you mentioned that. And then I think with the previous president, you had someone who wanted to take it a step further. It was no longer an intellectual exercise about how we could win elections. It became, how do we deny the results? How do we undermine the same institutions that have served Americans so well? And the fact of the matter is that America took a hit in diminished standing around the world over the last 4 years. And the culmination of that was certainly the events that we saw on January 6th, where we see insurrectionists take over the Capitol. And I think that the lesson learned a year later is that democracy is not guaranteed, that we need to, as public servants, continue to be beacons for civility, for civil discourse, and to take on the hard conversations about what kind of a nation we really are. I think about this conversation with respect to the impacts that this has on communities that have been disenfranchised for a long time. I mean, we're seeing laws that are being put forward in legislatures controlled by the GOP that are trying to roll back progress that we've made over the last 40 years. So what can we do here in Massachusetts? I think we can lead the way in voting rights. There is legislation that's currently pending before the legislature called the Votes Act, which would expand voting rights here in the Commonwealth by allowing access to things like same-day voting, increasing opportunities for early voting, mail-in voting, some of the same things that we put into place during the pandemic that we'd like to keep going moving forward, because we know who that impacts. It impacts folks that are living in poverty, where it's going to impact people of color and their ability to access the ballot box and democracy. But I think we can go a little bit deeper as well, and to continue to expand upon civic education. We have to really rebuild American confidence in media, which is why it's critically important that our leaders are willing to come to conversations like this one and engage with the press. I think that that's another piece over the last 4 years that we saw, was this constant attack on the credibility of established media and the integrity of journalists. And so I'm going to do my part as a leader, which is to ensure that I'm engaging with members of media, that I'm getting my message out there, and that I'm working on legislation that counters, I think, some of the negativity and, I'll be frank, some of the dangerous legislation that's been put out there by my friends on the other side.
Great. One of the things that bothers me is that the lies in Congress and the Senate, from the Republican side, so to speak, seems to be becoming the norm. It's what is believed. It's what separates the nation. And you have a group of people, it don't matter what you say, that they're not convinced that our last general election was won by Joe Biden and that it was stolen. And it doesn't matter what anyone say, they're still keeping on that belief. Now, do you see in the nearest future, in the next general election, if this continuous lie begin to be the core of people's beliefs, that we may very well enter a civil war?
Yeah, so I have tremendous faith in the American people. I think we've come to a head many times on some different issues. Mm-hmm. This seems to be one of the most pressing with respect to, I think, our identity as a country. I do think that it's incumbent upon Democrats to win in the midterms and to grow our majorities in both the House and the Senate. And to do that, we really need to continue to elect candidates who are focused on service, focused on equity, and going to really build the types of coalitions that helped propel President Biden into the White House in the first place. So I think about some of the midterm elections that are coming up, some of the Senate seats that are up for grabs, and there's a real opportunity to expand our numbers so that we're not in a 50-50 split in the Senate and holding a slim majority in the House. And that will allow the president and the Democratic leadership to be able to move forward with some of the key legislation that's been put forward around voting rights, enhancing our democratic institutions. And then additionally, I think the policies that are really going to touch people's lives. Right? We need to start having more conversations about what's the federal government's role when it comes to education. The president talked a great deal about expanding healthcare through a public option, and all that is going to be on the table. A clean energy future. How we get there is we need to expand the Senate and House majority that Democrats have. And I think that kind of organizing on the ground is what's really going to restore the confidence in people that the electoral system is fair, that government can continue to do good work on behalf of people in partnership with community.
Excellent. I don't mean to take you into international waters, but do you have any views presently on this Ukraine Russia situation? Do you think for a second, and this may be a little bit tough on you because you have no facts on this, but do you think the existence of Donald Trump in the past 4 or 5 years, so to speak, with Russia give Putin that time span to relax and refocus on how he should go about conquering and rebuilding the USSR?
An interesting question, and I certainly want to lead with my prayers, my thoughts, and my advocacy that the global community continue to rally behind the Ukraine to send humanitarian aid, as we know that there are over 100,000 people that have already tried to flee the country due to the actions of Russian aggression. And this is par for the course for Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. We've seen it over the last 8 years with respect to their buildup of a military presence next to the Ukraine, the annexation of the Crimea. And so I think that the president, the previous president, President Trump, certainly emboldened Putin to be able to maintain his modus operandi. But I am hopeful that what we're seeing coming out of Ukraine in terms of international collaboration, folks coming to their aid, the condemnation, the sanctions, is really going to bring Russia to the table and understand that sovereign nations have the right to determine the types of alliances that they want to have. I've been following the situation pretty closely. As you said, I don't want to wade too much into the national waters, but I do think at a minimum, I can share my belief is that sovereign nations have the right to choose the alliances that they want to participate in. And I know that part of the considerations for Russia deciding to inhumanely engage in warfare against the Ukrainian people is their proximity to Europe and the EU and wanting to become a NATO country. That's a choice that, again, the people of Ukraine, they elected a president, they elected leadership. And if that's the decision they want to make, war shouldn't be the threat. And I think that to this end, I'm hoping that the sanctions are effective, that the Ukrainian people continue to get the aid that they need, and that Russia will withdraw its forces expeditiously. The loss of human life is tragic. We're hearing reports of civilian casualties with the Ukrainian people, but then also there's the loss of sons and daughters of Russia, who I think are, again, being used in a way that, if they could resist, they might have. But it's certainly sad to see warfare like this, and I certainly condemn the actions of the Kremlin and President Putin, and I certainly hope for peace in short order.
Great. One of the things I would like to mention is that I think the NATO forces, and I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I think this is the way, are somewhat scared because Putin make it absolutely clear, we don't need you in Ukraine. And he used threatened methods that he has his hand on nuclear weapons. So do you think that may be very well a way that we want to go ahead and use sanctions opposed to getting physically combative in the Ukraine right now? Or do you see that one way or the other, NATO may very well have to get in a combative atmosphere?
Yeah, so the Ukraine is currently not a NATO member. Right. And so for listeners at home, in order for the defense pact of NATO to kick into effect, you have to be a NATO member. That doesn't preclude NATO countries from being able to provide aid to the Ukraine, which we are hearing reports that is happening and taking place. And so I do think that the role that the EU, NATO, the US will continue to play is one of using diplomatic tools to create pressure on Russia to come back to the table and withdraw its forces. So I certainly don't want to take us back to the Cold War era, but I do think that a diplomatic solution would be the best option. But right now, Russia needs to be isolated from the world, and we're starting to see that. These sanctions, they seem pretty severe. European countries are discussing removing their access to SWIFT. And I believe Turkey took action today to close off their access to the Black Sea. So I think we're seeing a strong response from the international community. And the message to Putin is very clear that Russian aggression is not welcomed, and sovereign nations have the right to determine their future. And this type of reversion to actions that we haven't really seen since Russia's actions in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, but really the World War was the last time we saw this type of activity in terms of unprovoked territorial expansion. So I really do hope that the combination of the resistance in Ukraine and the international response is one that has Russia reconsidering its current approach.
Great. And the final thing, Ukraine right now is crying out for aid in terms of having their airspace protected. Do you believe that the United States and NATO allies should at least, that's not getting physically combative, but do you think at least that much they can do in giving them airspace protection?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is a no-fly zone,
right?
Errol, and a no-fly zone would be a really aggressive military tactic, and essentially is a declaration of war from NATO allies in the United States. I doubt that that is something that gets implemented. I think the focus is going to be on humanitarian aid, trying to get Russia to come to the table via the sanctions and the isolation that they're engaging in. But I do not think that NATO countries and or the United States will engage in a no-fly zone. And that's something that I would defer to security experts who, I think I took some international relations courses and during my studies at Northeastern, but as I understand, no